Today I'm speaking with Layne Yancey. Layne, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, thanks for
And
having me.
sure. And for an intro, I just wanted to give a brief bio. I don't know too much about Layne yet, so thank you for being willing to do this without us having a deep connection yet, but I'm looking forward to hearing your story. What I do know is that Layne is an ex-vangelical on TikTok, and we'll have the link for her TikTok beneath this video, so please go check that out. She grew up in an inner city Baptist church in Chicago. She was homeschooled and deeply affected by purity culture, and after years of shame and even self-hatred, she's finally finding freedom in the truth of reality. So that's just big picture. We're going to zoom in a lot, obviously, on some of those details. But before we get into anything serious, could you tell us just a little bit more about your life and who you are?
Yeah, so I was a gymnast, a competitive gymnast growing up. I did that for 11 years. So that was a huge part of my childhood on the outside of church. That was probably the only other identity I had. Um, and so later on, I got into performing arts. And so I became a dancer as a young
Hmm.
adult. I've done ballet, jazz, hip hop. I was teaching dance. And then my daughter was born, and I um, decided to become a doula. And I really enjoy it. And for those of you who don't know what a doula is, that's a sort of like a birth coach. I support women through pregnancy, labor, birth, postpartum, and I also do lactation. I'm very passionate about it, and I really enjoy helping women of color. That is my goal because the mortality rate is so much higher. I did not know until my birth experience, which was very traumatic. But anyway, I'm very passionate about it. I love it. And it brings a lot of joy to my life and purpose, which is something I feel like I kind of lost when leaving Christianity, is like that purpose. And so becoming a doula has really given me, just something to really be passionate about.
Yeah.
I love helping people and serving people. And that's like, I can still do that.
What a
Um,
great thing. I can testify. We've had doulas at all of our four births, and it's makes such a difference.
oh, yes.
Hmm.
Yes,
Are most of
absolutely.
the births home births?
No, so I work in hospitals,
Okay.
but I have done a home birth before, and
Hmm.
I would love to do more home births.
Yeah. We were going to do a home birth for our first one, and at the end, we changed gears and had it in the hospital. And as usual, it was a bad experience, very bad experience in the hospital. So we had the next three at home, and it was just beautiful, no issues at all. So
Oh, that's so nice.
yeah,
I'm
that's great that
glad
you're
you
helping people too. It's what a great thing because people really do. I mean,
do.
when you think about birth
Yeah,
experiences, so many people talk about how bad they are, and just to be able
yes.
to have it should be a
So
beautiful
many
time of
horrible
life.
stories, and especially for women of color. And for those of you who don't know, here in Chicago, the mortality rate is 6 times higher for a woman
Mm.
of color versus a white woman. And then I know in New York, it's actually 12 times higher.
Mm.
And then in the US alone, it's 4 times.
Mm. In
So
terms of
it,
the babies not making it.
yes, and mothers as well.
Mm.
It's very sad.
That's awful. Yeah,
And
it
I
seems
didn't
like
know
this.
these things until I took the training. So, and it made so much sense as to why I was treated inhuman
Mm.
during my, labor. And,
Yeah.
but yeah, but it's so nice because, as a Christian, it's like my whole purpose was to serve others always. And that has always been a part of me. So leaving Christianity, it kind of created like this confusion, like, do I want to help people because I actually want to help people or because I feel obligated? And I realized this is something I just love to do personally. It's just a part of me. I enjoy serving and just helping
Mm.
families. I'm a helper. That's just who I am.
Yeah.
And
That's
it's just
awesome.
kind of cool to like learn who I am and not have to be like, oh, it's because God, told me to do it, or, I'm just being me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome. I love too how people like yourself with being a doula, you really help people to trust their bodies and to really learn to just
Yes.
embrace the beauty of birth and so forth. It's such a amazing process. I've been there, watched our four babies get born. It's right there, pretty much catching them, and it's
Oh,
just an amazing process. And
it
for
is.
people to feel like this is not some thing that should just be in the hands of a, of a doctor in a beeping hospital or something. This is just a beautiful part of life, and it should
It
be
is.
in. It shouldn't be scary. It should not be. It shouldn't be threatening to
Absolutely.
people's lives either. So anyway, I'm digressing, but thank you so much for what you do there for people. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And before we get into your story, is there anything else in terms of just your hobbies or aspirations that you could add?
As of right now, not so much. I am in therapy, in trauma therapy, and we're working through all my issues. And hopefully I will know more about my future aspirations
Yeah.
as I work through more of my trauma.
Would you characterize, and I'm jumping ahead here, but would you characterize a lot of that as religious trauma?
Yes, there's religious trauma, but there is also sexual trauma as well.
Gotcha. Well, I feel like I'm jumping ahead too many times, so I'm going to just pass the floor to you and let you kind of tell us your story from the earliest days and tell us where you're
Yeah.
coming from and how it evolved.
Yeah. So for as long as I can remember, I've been a Christian. My family, so I'm biracial. My parents both came from unstable homes. And they wanted to create a healthy home for their kids, which I understand completely as a mom myself. And the thing that I think is really messed up, especially like in the 90s, early 2000s, I really feel like evangelicalism kind of preyed on parents and their fears. And so my parents got deeply involved in this church in the inner city. And this is where things are kind of confusing and complicated because in inner city churches, they can do a lot of good for the community. They will have things for people that they can't get anywhere else. Like, maybe they need food or they need clothes, or the kids just need a place safe to be during the day, and so they were able to provide that, and my parents were very involved. My mom did the children's ministry, and my dad was in the youth ministry or junior high. So I grew up in the church, and so I was able to see the good side of things, and I was able to see all the beautiful things that the church can do. It is not till recently that I now see the dark side. I know that there were a lot of people who were there to help the community. And I think that is what Christianity should be, that's what they should be serving others. But it definitely, it got a little weird. I think it was very controlling over the members' lives. And it almost was kind of cultish. I didn't know as a kid because I didn't know anything else. I grew up in this church and it was my life.
Yeah, you think it's normal?
Yeah. Like I was in the nursery and, then went, the 2s and 3s and the 4s and 5s. And then they call it kids side. And then they have youth group and, the whole shebang. And there were a lot of great fun experiences. And so it's conflicting when I look back because I remember a lot of good things. But I think what really damaged me was when I got into junior high and they started preaching purity culture. The church was very legalistic. And I don't know if you're familiar with the IBLP.
Enough to know about it. Yeah.
If you know the Duggars, they follow the IBLP. Their headquarters was actually in Wheaton, Illinois at the time, which so like the Quiverful movement, that was all very popular. I was homeschooled. I was not part of the IBLP, but that culture, I was very enmeshed in, like homeschool groups, and like all of that was a part of the church and the teachings, everything. So even though they were doing good things, there was also like this weird cult kind of going on in the background for people who were like members of the church.
And is it fair to say it's very insular, where you, like, for people that are really in it, you don't really get much of an outsider's perspective. It's very much like a party line. Just everyone kind of adheres to it and you're kind of sheltered.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So it's like if you're on the outside and you're just getting help from them, I feel like it's not as damaging. But when you're in it and you're growing up in that church as a child, it can be very dangerous.
Can I ask you, you mentioned purity culture.
Yeah.
Just for anyone that doesn't know, I assume a lot of people do, but for anyone that doesn't know, and I know that purity culture is kind of a catchphrase that includes modesty culture, virginity culture, shame culture, just call it purity culture for simplicity. But what does that look like practically when they're preaching it, or, giving you rules and regulations for how to live your life?
Yeah. So for me, growing up in the church, girls and boys were always separated. It was, we did this program called True Love Waits. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yeah.
But basically I remember signing a card 3 years in a row saying I was going to be abstinent.
Josh McDowell, right?
I think so. I believe so. And then I was under the authority of my father. I signed this. And to me, like, I took that very, very seriously. And so even, being a part of youth group and, we had these big things called youth night. They were huge. Like the church would be packed, like people from all over, the neighborhood would be there. And they really use these events to really draw in people. And that's kind of really where they preach that stuff.
Can I ask about what you said about your dad being part of it? Would you say that there was a sense of, like, I've heard in a lot of groups, the sense of like you're kind of under your father's authority and you're anticipating at some point being transferred, so to speak, to your husband's authority. And it's kind of like part of the male dominated sense of, we are responsible for not just providing for, our daughters and so forth, but we're actually responsible to protect them. And that the goal is, in an ideal sense, is to be able to pass your daughter on to future man with as few experiences sexually, hopefully, zero, as possible, so that you can literally, and it's very similar to the idea of, in the Bible, it talks about that, the church being presented to God as a pure virgin, to Christ as a pure virgin. And it's like, well, you want to exemplify what's happening in the church and your family. Was that part of your theology as far as you know?
Absolutely. Okay. The thing is, my parents, I feel, were a little more on the progressive side in the church, but being in the church, you were still a part of all of it. So even if my parents may not have taken it as seriously, I did, because I didn't know anything else. And I'm understanding this more and more now, that my parents may not have had the same ideas in their head that was going into my head as a young child, because I was so involved in the church. It was my life. And I read I Kissed Dating Goodbye, and it was basically, and you look up to the kids who are older than you, and it was you see them court and then they get married inside the church, and like, that's the goal. You see them serving together and they have all these kids together. And so I looked at that and I was like, that's my future. That's what I'm supposed to be. Because that's what I was taught. So even if my parents were a little more progressive in their views, I didn't see it. Because they were still very much a part of it, but I feel like maybe in their head it wasn't as serious as I took it. And it's really weird. And this is something I'm having to go through, with my parents now, to kind of help them understand, because they're like, oh, well, we didn't want to teach you that. And this, I'm like, oh, okay, but you don't understand. Like, I didn't have a choice. I was I was in Sunday school every single week. Like I read these books. I was indoctrinated to, like, I did youth group and I went on the camps, and it's like, you're literally at camp and, you're put in these little cabins, and you are with all the girls, and you're talking about purity culture and how you can't tempt the men, and how, when we're going swimming, we have to wear like giant t-shirts over our bathing suits so we don't tempt anyone. And that was all it was for the women. At least it was all about being pure and becoming, and to be a good future wife. And so that is what I was taught. And even if my parents, that wasn't their intention, like I'm trying to explain to them, like, that is what I was taught at the church. And this is where I think it's really sad, where I feel like the church kind of preys on parents who they want their kids to be in a healthy environment, a safe environment. And I know that's what my parents wanted for me, but it was definitely, there was a lot of harm done through the purity culture and that movement of just having like this standard or formula of how things were supposed to go. And that if you're pure and you save your sex for marriage, you're going to have this amazing marriage and this amazing sex life, and you'll be blessed. And that was the message that was basically taught and shoved down my throat. My childhood and preteens and all those years of, even, when your body's developing and you have new feelings and you learn to suppress any sort of sexuality in your body because you don't want to be, bad. And the way the church was, they're going to tell your parents if, oh, you were talking to a boy over there. Or like I went away when I was 15, I went to youth camp, and I met a boy there, and he asked me out and I said yes. And I guess the leaders ended up telling my parents about it later, and then we had to break up. And it was very humiliating for me as a 15-year-old. And like, I was just a girl wanting to be normal. I liked a boy and a boy liked me. And there was no really explaining as to why. It was just, I remember my parents kind of laughed at me. They're like, oh, well, you can't court until you're 18. So, because dating's only for marriage. So that's kind of like where the shame started. I think that was my first experience of like feeling shame. And I didn't do anything with this boy. Like we might've held hands once. But I remember feeling so much shame that I like allowed myself to, to fall away from God in that way. So that's one particular experience I remember, when I was really young.
Yeah. I have a few quick questions. And I know we're kind of diverging from the gospel and salvation issue, but it's good to dive into this. So since we're on it, I'm just going to keep going with it. When you mentioned your church talking about purity culture, did you feel like there was any balance of saying, but like sexuality is still beautiful within marriage? Or did you feel like it was more focused on shame? Like I've heard it go both ways, where some people are like, no, I've heard messages of, they're like, no, dive into sexuality just in marriage, but it's wonderful, it's fun, it's beautiful. And then other people are like, no, it was always kind of shameful. Like, how did that play out for you?
The goal was always marriage. And I remember even youth leaders or the youth pastor even talking about how much they love sex and things like that. So it was always like, you want to get married so you can experience this amazing thing.
Okay. So there was a beauty to it.
Even you can't sit next to the boys in youth group. Like, so it was very backwards. I don't know. You're supposed to have this amazing sex life when you're married, but then before this, you can't even sit next to the boys. Like, I don't know. It made no sense.
Did you feel like you understood sex growing up? Like, did you even understand what it was?
No, I did not understand. I guess I could move forward so I was homeschooled.
Okay.
And so when I was in sixth grade in middle school, I ended up, we moved out away from the city to the suburbs, and my parents put me and my siblings in public school. And that was my exposure to my sex education. Was basically, I didn't even know there was a such thing as swear words. So I'm like this 11-year-old or 12-year-old in middle school learning about these, sexual innuendos for the first time, learning bad words for the first time.
That had to be really shocking compared to those conservative groups.
I was a deer in headlights. I had to be held back a year because I was behind emotionally, and I was so scared. I was, when you're told your whole life that everyone is sinful, and then all of a sudden you're sitting there and you're like supposed to be, this Christian, but then everyone around you is just, living their life. And so in my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm surrounded by all these sinners. That was scary. And I remember in the lunchroom, I had to sit next to a guy at one point, and I was like terrified, thinking that that was a sin. I'm like a 12-year-old sitting in the lunchroom. Somehow
a sexual innuendo or something.
Yeah. I don't even remember. I just remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be sitting here. Like, this is bad. This is sinful. So it was always so conflicting, and like this responsibility of feeling like I had to save all of them. But at the same time, I wanted to just fit in somehow, but I didn't know how to fit in because I had no social skills. And
did you have siblings growing up?
Yes, I did. I'm the oldest of 4.
Okay. So how did they seem to do with those kind of transitions? Are they similar in their stories?
So my sister and I, we were basically raised as twins. We're 2 years apart. Exactly. My birthday's July 1st. Her birthday's July 2nd. And she was a little more ahead. So I feel like when she went into school, she was, it's weird. Like, me being the oldest, I was the most sheltered. I was the most suppressed, most held back. And so I feel like my sister did not struggle as much. But then my brother did. He was the next one, and he still struggles a lot with anxiety, and to this day. And I believe it's, it definitely has to do with our childhood and that short time that he was homeschooled, not as long as I was, but he was for a short time. My youngest brother, he completely grew up in public school. I don't even think he identifies as a Christian. He's in his own, like, he's a funny kid. He just does his thing. And, my parents are probably they're not very happy with his choices, but to me, he's just a normal kid. And he had that opportunity because he grew up in public school, where I did not. And
with public school, did you feel like the devil was tempting you there? Like, how did the devil
totally
come into it? Okay.
Constantly. I mean, everything, even just words I would say, or what I was going to wear each day, or just the behavior of the kids, like everything. Like, it was terrifying, just constantly thinking like what was influencing me, and like me wanting to be normal. Like, that was me thinking like, oh, that's my sinful nature coming out, like me wanting to be, I want to be of the world. We're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world. And that was very confusing for me, me being a preteen, my body developing, and being in public school, and trying to be this young woman of God, I guess, a pure young woman of God. And then having all these temptations, I guess you would say, and there was the thing that is so weird to me is that there were never clear lines in church of what is good and what is bad. It was just kind of like the church is good and the world is bad. So that it's very confusing for a child.
Yeah. Very dualistic.
Yeah.
Can I ask, with your parents letting you go there, I'm surprised to hear that. And I'm sure that some people do it for financial reasons. Maybe it's cheaper, but was it just finances, or was there a philosophical reason that they let you go there? Because
Yeah.
most people that in that group would be horrified to think of sending their kids to a public
Oh,
school.
right. Yeah. And this is where it comes in, where I feel like my parents were more on the progressive side. My dad, especially, being a Black man, I think he really valued his children getting a proper education. And when we were in like the city, the schools were just not good there. So I think when we ended up moving out to the suburbs for financial reasons, the taxes were just, too high. They're still too high here. And so the public schools where we ended up moving were much better. They were supposed to be good public schools. So my dad made that choice of, wanting to send us there. And that was a very, very hard transition for me. Looking back now, though, I've actually thanked my father recently, being like, I'm so glad that you did send me, as traumatizing as it was and as horrible as it was for me to adjust. I'm so glad that I at least got that little bit of exposure to life. Because, as a young adult, I really, really struggled in the real world. And I feel like if I hadn't even had that experience, how much worse it would have been. So, me and my dad have our issues, but I am thankful now at this point that he did put us in school when he did. It was very, very hard for me, though. It was a very hard transition. I was bullied a lot because I didn't have proper social skills. I've always been too nice, too trusting, and I didn't fully understand that people are mean, and in middle school too, like kids are ruthless in middle school. And it was very difficult for me to understand that kids aren't going to treat you the way you treat them. So I ended up being bullied a lot. But I learned a lot. That's where I remember I actually ended up signing. So I remember the first year I was there. So we do this like sex education thing. Your parents have to sign a waiver for you to go. I was not allowed to go the first time. So the second year, I actually forged my mom's signature so I could go. And that's where I had my sex education, because I think now, like, what would my education even have been if I hadn't forged that signature? Because, my parents wanted, or, like they're supposed to teach me about that stuff. Like, I guess the public school system is not going to, they're going to teach you not godly or ungodly worldly things, I guess. But that's how I learned about sex. And then I didn't really know about the mechanics of sex until, porn. I was exposed to that in school. And so that's that's really how I learned about sex, was really from the kids in school, and then porn. And then the little bit of sex education that I got from the one trip that I went on with my school. And that was very Mean Girls of, you're going to have AIDS and you're going to die. And, they talk about all the diseases and this and that. And so like, they're still trying to kind of scare you out of sex. Of course, that was sex education, but it was more than nothing. But it was still probably not the best. It was back in the early 2000s. And I feel like purity culture was still even in the public schools at that point. I feel like a little bit, where they still taught abstinence. Of course, they still taught protection and birth control and all that stuff. But at the same time, they still taught abstinence too. So it was, I don't know, there was this kind of like a whole sex for me was just very, very confusing. There was never a clear, I can't really find the right words for it. It was just very confusing. I don't think I properly understood how sex worked, or consent. I was never taught consent. I guess that would be the word for it. It was never about women's pleasure, or I didn't really know that like that was a thing. The they talked about how sex is supposed to feel good, but I didn't really understand the mechanics of that because I was taught that, masturbation was wrong. So it's like I didn't even have the opportunity to explore my own body. So kind of moving forward into to high school, I finally started to find myself a little more. I think I found I had friends that I'm still friends with today, and they really helped me survive and get through.
Can I ask about that? Did you still say really connected to your Christian friends, or you're talking only about the public school friends?
Yeah, so definitely in middle school, I was still very, very, very meshed with the church and my church friends who I grew up with for as long as I could remember. We grew up we were in the nursery together, and then in youth group.
So you were kind of like a foot in both worlds, really.
Oh yeah.
This whole time.
Yeah. It was really strange. And also being biracial, that also makes things super strange. So it was,
how did that affect you and your experience?
Yeah, it's weird because I grew up in an inner city church. And so there I'm surrounded by, mostly people of color. And then when we moved out to the suburbs and I went to this, this school, it was like all white kids. And I was the only, I think I was one of two Black girls in my grade. And it was weird. It was super, super strange. And I just was not like the culture shock, of, being surrounded by inner city kids versus, now you're surrounded by all these white kids. And I definitely experienced racism for the first time, which I didn't fully understand, because I was sheltered. I didn't, really understand what racism was. Like, I didn't understand that people were just like not kind. I had to really learn how to toughen up, because I was never given any sort of skills to really stand up for myself, have any sort of self-esteem, or confidence of any sort. I was just I was a fish out of water constantly. It was really hard. But, when I got to high school, I kind of started to find a little bit of an identity, and I really started to feel, I was living a double life at this point. So I felt like I was this Christian girl at home and at church. And then at school, I was trying my hardest just to be a normal kid, which was still hard to do because of my upbringing. But, of course, kids took advantage of me all the time because I was too nice and I was too innocent. But, I was finally able to develop some normal relationships. I ended up leaving competitive gymnastics and I joined the theater. And if anyone's familiar with theater, it's a very secular environment. You have a changing room where everyone changes together. And, in high school, kids are always talking about sex constantly. So I remember always feeling like, oh, this is a bad place. But a part of me almost liked it. Like I enjoyed being able to be exposed to, I guess, normalcy somewhat. But at the same time, I felt all this shame. It's like I could never fully accept myself. At the same time, I was scared, had this fear of hell, and how I was just this horrible sinner, this worldly girl who just wants to fit in. And there was so much fear in that. It was so conflicting all the time of wanting to be the Christian, but then also wanting to be normal. And I can't even explain how hard and just confusing and shameful it was. I just felt like every day I was living in shame. And especially when I would come home, because I couldn't talk about, what was happening at school because, that wasn't allowed. So later on, the summer before my senior year, I was raped at a sleepover, and I didn't know that I was. I thought that it was my fault. And I had never been taught consent. I didn't know about my own body, so I didn't know what things were supposed to feel like. And so I just kind of like kept that inside. I ended up writing about it in my diary, and my mother found it and lost her mind. She regrets it now, but at the time it was really, really hard. They ended up sending me away to church camp. And I came back, and my mom had completely redone my room. I had a collage of posters on my wall. And she took everything down, threw it all away, went through all my stuff. And yes, painted Bible verses on my wall. So me coming home, I'm thinking, oh, I'm punished now. Like I'm bad. I'm a slut. I'm a whore because, I allowed this to happen to me, or I asked for it. So going into school that year, as a 17, 18-year-old, I think emotionally, I was probably still around 15 years old. I was still behind. I had a lot of catch up to do when I started public school. And I ended up, this guy asked me out in the beginning of the year, and I said yes, because I was so desperate for some sort of love, and just, that first guy didn't care about me. And so I had all this shame of, when you're supposed to marry that person that you have sex with. And so I said yes to this guy, and we became sexually active. And my parents ended up finding out, and my mother took my purity ring away. My dad took away all my privileges. I was no longer allowed to drive. And at this point, I was 18 years old. I was 18, and I was punished for being a normal human being.
Can I go back a second to the earlier story?
Yeah.
It almost sounds like they were kind of blaming you for being raped. Is that?
Yes.
How did that work out? Because you obviously are in a vulnerable spot where you needed nothing but
I needed a lot of help. I needed a lot of help. The thing is, I didn't know that I was raped. And so the way I wrote about it in my diary was from this point of view of, it was like this, like it was love or something, because I didn't understand. Like I was trying to look at it in a way as like, we're going to get married or something, or like that's how confused I was. And so when my mom read it, she thought that I did this. But now that I look back, I'm like, she never really sat down and talked to me about it. And
it almost sounds like too, they were sending the message of you're somehow damaged goods.
Yes.
And just that message cannot go to people. You can't say that.
And my mom regrets it now. She's gone through therapy, and she's on medication, and, she's gone through the work, and she regrets the way she handled it. They did end up putting me in therapy that senior year with a Christian therapist. But at the time I did not understand. I still thought it was a part of being punished. So I basically lied to my therapist most of the time, because I thought that I was basically being spied on, like that she was going to be telling my parents anything that I said. So I never really got the proper help that I needed at that time. And I just lived the 2 years after that it happened. I was just me trying to survive. I hated myself. There was I used to brag to my friends about my purity ring. My friends made fun of me, and we still joke about it to this day, about, how like that was my identity, was being pure. And when that was taken away from me, I lost my identity. I didn't know who I was. I was a Christian. I was a virgin. That was who I was. And so when that was gone, and then I felt like I no longer had, like, I was disgraced from my family. Like, that's how it felt. I think for my parents, after we've spoke, like, that's not how it was for them. They were just in shock themselves, which does not excuse their behavior whatsoever. But the way they handled it, the way I perceived it as a young teenager, I thought that I was just being shamed. I thought that I was worthless at this point, that I had no value. And so I ended up going to Belhaven University in Jackson, Mississippi. It's a private Christian college. I got accepted to 2 Christian colleges, and so I kind of chose between the 2. And so when I went to college, I ended up found out that my boyfriend had been cheating on me, and that was devastating because I thought I was going to marry this guy. And so that's when I became suicidal, and I was on suicide watch at my school. I started
about that.
Yeah.
Would you have said it was just like a passing thought? Like, I wonder what would happen if I just never existed or something, or were you actually?
No, I was planning, for sure. Yeah. I wanted to overdose on whatever I could find.
What was your
I think at that moment I had ibuprofen, and I don't even know if that would have worked, but yeah. I remember I wanted to, like, just down a whole bottle of ibuprofen. Like, I was on the floor crying. Like, I thought I was done. Like, what's the point of living at this point? I'm worth nothing. Mm-hmm. It was scary.
Gotcha. I wanted to ask, I know we've kind of jumped around it, but I did want to make sure I brought it up at some point, and this might be a good point to put a pin in the suicide discussion, because I want to come right back to it.
Yes.
But the earlier part of your life, was there a point in which you actually placed your faith in Christ as your savior?
Yeah. I'm so sorry.
You're fine. It's just
much.
No, it's good. Just I'm gonna, when we're done talking about this, I want to tie it back to the suicide time frame.
Yeah. So I remember specifically when I was about 7, praying with my mom. The whole, I want Jesus. I know I'm a sinner. I want Jesus to come into my heart, and I want to live for him. So, like, I remember doing that. I was in Awanas, memorizing scripture. I actually still have one of the books, and I was looking at it, and something that I've always visually remembered was the, like, 2 cliffs. It was like the world, and then heaven, and then there was a cross, and then below was like fire. Yeah. And I remember, like, that's something that picture stuck with me. And so I realize now, that was around the time I got, saved. And I feel like that picture played a big role in that, and other things that they were teaching us at that time. But, like, I remember that picture specifically.
Did you get the little vest with the crown?
Yeah, I had the vests. I had the, the crown, all that stuff.
I did it too. My wife actually, she's a believer, fundamentalist Christian, and she takes the kids, and it kind of re-traumatizes me every Sunday night when they go. But fortunately, I'm doing, I protect their minds a lot. So they come home and tell me what Bible story, and I'll tell them which mythology it was copied from. So they know it's not real, but it still kind of hurts my heart a lot. But,
yeah, no, that's scary, because I feel like I was definitely traumatized in Awanas. I feel like I blocked out a lot of the memories for some reason. But the things that I do remember, I don't remember Awanas being fun for some reason. Like, it wasn't, like, it was work for me, like having to memorize verses. Like, there was so much pressure and having to memorize things, and like, it wasn't a good experience. Like, even when I was still a Christian, I was like, I'm not going to have my kids do that. It was weird.
Especially when you look at the theology that they're teaching kids of, you're a sinner, you're going to burn in hell. And if the implication that all your friends who don't believe like you are going to burn in hell.
Oh, yeah.
Which they may not directly say, but they imply it. It's like,
I was actually reading one of my Awana books, and it was like, oh, so why are you a sinner or something? Or what's something that you need to, repent for? And on there it said, like, I was mean to my sister. Like, I just look back at that and I'm like, you're telling little children that they are worthy of hell because they, was mean to their sibling. Like, I had to think of reasons of why I deserve to go to hell. Like, and I see it in my like child handwriting, like, that's obvious. That was me just like bullshitting. Sorry, me just like BSing whatever I could come up in my head of what I did wrong. So it started at a very young age of that shame and just knowing that I'm a sinner. All my desires is sinful. I was born bad. And it's so, so toxic because that followed me. This is something I'm still unlearning right now, like to this day. Like, all my desires are not bad. I'm just human. Humans make mistakes and that's okay. We learn from our mistakes. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with us.
Yeah. One of the bad ideas too that's wrapped up in that, and I'm sure you know this verse backwards and forwards like I do, but Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, lean not on your own understanding. I can't quote it now. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him. And he'll direct your paths. But the idea of like, don't trust yourself. Your thoughts, your perspective, your ideas are really deficient. They're sinful. They're depraved even. But they're certainly warped compared to what God's perspective is. So don't trust yourself. Trust in the Lord.
Yeah.
And when you mix that with what you said, where like you're sinful in terms of just who you are and even your body, but certainly your attitudes, you're sinful and you're wicked and you're deserving of punishment. And then you add to it, do not trust your own mind. You end up really in a warped situation as you're growing up, because you just feel like you're constantly telling yourself, I'm learning something, but I'm probably seeing it wrong. And I'm growing in this area, but this wasn't purely spiritual. So I'm probably bringing some natural, the worldliness to it. And this constant sense of I don't know if you heard it this way, but a lot of sermons I heard were about putting to death the deeds of the flesh. Like you're literally trying to kill your selfishness. So they'd say kill yourself and not treat it suicidally. Yeah, like your sinful attitudes, and they use that reference in I think 1 Samuel, where the Israelites were supposed to kill all the Amalekites, and they did kill most of them, but they left King Agag alive and some of the animals. And then Samuel, the prophet, came and he's like, "What are these animals that I'm hearing, and why is King Agag alive?" And it says he literally took out a knife and hacked Agag to pieces in front of everybody. And the sermons were often preached like, that's what you need to do to yourself. Hack your Agag to pieces. Hack your selfishness to pieces. And if you do anything less than that, you are opening up the door to basically trying to combine, sin and God, and there's never going to work.
I feel like that's what I did. My whole life was hacking myself to pieces, especially being in public school and thinking all of my desires and feelings were bad and sinful. Like you're just constantly I think that's the best way to put it, is just like cutting yourself to pieces because you're so horrible and worthless. And you're, for me, I was nothing. I was nothing without Christ. If I don't have Jesus, then I literally have no purpose.
Did you feel secure though in Christ? Like, did you feel like, despite some of the issues back and forth growing up, that there was some kind of underlying foundation of, no matter what storms I face, I'm in Christ. I'm going to heaven someday.
And that was my identity. It's who I was. Jesus, I lived and breathed Jesus. Even though I had those worldly desires in school, I was still stood out completely from anyone else in that school because I was so innocent. I was, hi, I'm Layne, and I'm a Christian and I'm saving my sex for marriage. That's how I used to talk all the time,
kind of like as your example to tell people,
yes,
there's a better way to live. Let me tell you about Jesus, kind of stuff.
I've actually heard from friends that they've told me that, my voice changed recently. Like I if I hear videos or, I look at, it's so embarrassing. I'm like, I can't believe I talked and act like that. Like now I'm a real person. I can just be myself. And there's not this whole like almost fear of, Jesus was my life. I did missions trips. I remember going to Mexico and we were in this neighborhood where they didn't have electricity. The children didn't have shoes. And, I took that so seriously. Like we're teaching the gospel to these families so that, they can find Jesus. And I can't even explain it. Like it was everything for me. Like there was no other option outside of Christ or God or, like that was it.
If you were talking to somebody about this, what would you have said as the gospel? If, say a friend had come to you in school and said, Layne, I know that you're different. I know you're a Christian. I think God might be pulling on my heart to do the same thing, but I really need to understand it. What, like you tell me about going to heaven, having peace with God. Like, what is that about? At that point, they're kind of like, that's like the golden ticket for a Christian. Like, yes, someone's finally seeing the difference. The next words out of your mouth are basically going to be the gospel. Like, what would you have said at that point?
Yeah, no, I would have told them, Jesus loves you. We're all sinners and we're all worthy of, eternal punishment. But that Jesus sacrificed himself for us because he loves us. And, he's creating a special place for us in heaven and that he has a purpose for us. And just like in celebrating that and saying how much he brings joy to my life. Which I think was actually anxiety. And just kind of trying to share like, the love of Christ and how it was all about, that love and joy and acceptance, when I realized it was far from that. But so
his burden wasn't easy and his yoke wasn't light.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you ever, when you're experiencing God, like just personally one-on-one, did you ever sense his presence, whether you're like in prayer or in a church? And even sometimes I think a lot of us sensed it with worship music where we just,
definitely.
I know people talk about the confusion of like just the way music is played often has an emotional feeling. Like it literally sends like goosebumps on your hand or your neck sometimes. And people confuse that and think that's the spirit. But like, what was it like just thinking, going beyond just, I profess my faith, to like feeling like he's here and he's talking to me or he's comforting me or he's giving me wisdom to take path A or path B? Like, what was that more experiential like?
Yeah. So the churches that I went to growing up had really, really good music. So the Baptist church I grew up, it was,
good music.
but exactly. But and like it made you feel good.
Right.
Like I've been to churches before. Like I remember I'd go to like my grandma's church and it was like really boring, reading from the books, like, that type thing. Whereas, at the Baptist church, you have everyone praising and jumping around and having fun and dancing. And, I love that. You feel it's like everyone, kind of dancing and praising together. There's like this whole feeling of what I thought was God at the time. And then even when later on, when we left the Baptist church and went to a more contemporary church, then you have the whole like Hillsong style of worship music. And like that is very, they're very, very good at pulling those heartstrings and, have the tears falling down and your hands up. And I experienced all of that. And I definitely always thought that was God, and it was almost like if I wasn't feeling emotional, that there was something wrong with me. So
did you ever see a miracle or think you heard of one?
So for me personally, I have always had very vivid dreams. And so I truly believe that is how God spoke to me. Like that was how I chose my college. I had a dream about going to that school. And I was like, oh, God spoke to me in a dream. And that's why I'm supposed to go there. And so I definitely felt like, I guess that was my supernatural experiences, was just having, I've just always been a vivid dreamer. That's just a part of who I am. And so I just always thought that was God talking to me.
Did you ever actually feel like you've audibly heard God?
I know this sounds weird, but in my dreams, I felt like I would have conversations with God, and, that he was there. And then I remember as a kid, I would some days like just sit on the floor and cry just to experience God. I would like just get really emotional and just start breaking myself down and just begging God to, come over me and fill me with his presence. I did this a lot as a kid growing up, like, younger than 10, doing things like that.
Did you ever have the thing where a lot of us prayed this in groups I was with, but the idea of God break me?
Yeah.
Like we used to pray. I don't know if you heard this story, but there was something that was going around. A lot of preachers would say it. They'd say that there were shepherds would sometimes have sheep that would constantly stray, and so they would literally break one of the sheep's bones in one of their legs, so that the sheep literally couldn't walk, and they would like bandage it up, but the sheep literally had to be carried around on the shepherd's neck for a while, and then when the bone was finally fine again, they could unbandage it and let the sheep walk just like before. The sheep was so used to being close to the shepherd that the sheep stayed close by and the idea of like, Lord, if you have to break me, whatever you have to do, I mean, even if you have to make me get cancer or quadriplegic or something like Johnny Oxentada, that thing would happen to her, or whatever it is, deprive me of anything. What I want to be is a vessel, holy and ready, useful to you. And if the idea to like a shattered piece of pottery, like I want to feel like I'm some whole pottery. And Lord, if the best way to make me useful to you is to break me in little shards and then use your supernatural glue to put me back together, break away, because I want to keep my hands open for you to give and take away. As that song says, he gives and takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And God, I want to stop holding the things of this world. I want to keep my eyes on you. And did you feel like that was part of your prayer, is just, God,
yes,
I don't have dreams. My dreams are your dreams.
I remember being a little girl, a little child, younger than 9, doing that, at home, sitting on the floor of my bedroom. And I watched like weird documentaries now of cults and, and so I see things of, children crying.
Jesus
and
camp?
just like brainwashing. Yes. Oh yeah. Yes. And it's so disturbing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like that was me as a kid. Like I was so brainwashed that I was breaking myself down, asking God to break me, so I could be his vessel, as a little child. Like it's just so wrong to me. I look back and it's just, I feel like my childhood was almost taken away. Like I didn't, of course I was a child, but I had so much, there was so much going on in my head that a child should not have had to think about. Should not have had to think about the end times and death and, my purpose of, serving a deity, and just so much pressure to put on a little kid who's just should be playing,
I was going to ask you about the end times before I have a few more questions, and I want to get back to the suicide part of the story. But what was your perspective on the end times? Was it just that Jesus is coming back any minute now, or how was that playing out?
So I grew up with my mother. She always told me, she's like, my dad always told me that I wasn't going to live till 40. She always said that growing up. So that was like one thing in my head that was like, Jesus is going to come back any day. But at my church, so I told you about like youth night. that was like one of the biggest events. The first youth night that I was in was called Abducted. And this was around the time when the Left Behind movies were coming out. And so everyone was really into that. And so the youth night, they do like skits, they do the worship, they do the dance. So I was part of the dance. And they do those skits of, when you're being judged, you have the book of life and they're talking about, I was a good person, this and that, but your name's not in here because, you didn't ask God, to be your personal savior, or Jesus be your personal savior. Yep. And then there's like the other bad person who's done horrible things, but they repented and then they go to heaven. I just remember like the dramatic music and lights and thunder that they would make when this, good person is being dragged to hell. Yep. Like that was a part of it, but then it was about the rapture. And so they did the scenes where, everyone disappears and you're the like last one left and there's clothes everywhere. I remember, at the time everyone was like, oh, this is so cool. And I look at that and I'm like, oh my gosh, that was kind of traumatizing. That was really traumatizing because I thought that was real. I read the Left Behind Kids series. So that was my view, was, the rapture and times and tribulation and all of that. And that was scary. I was like, I don't want to be here on this earth. And sometimes if I would be, walk into a room at home and there would be no one there, I would be scared that I was left behind. And I've heard that story a few times now from different people. Yeah. But that's really messed up. Now looking back, how often that happened for me, being afraid that I was left behind.
And for those who are going to be left behind, if you were like, well, I'm sure now that I'm with Jesus, so he'll take me. But you're what are you going to like literally in your, in all of our kind of bodies ascend up to heaven, like you say, where there's all the clothes left behind, all the cars crashing and so forth, but all of us are ascending. So we're like going to look down as we're looking up to, Jesus is taking us, look down at our friends and family who didn't believe, and like, sorry, it sucks to be you. You're about to face tribulation and the mark of the beast. It's like the whole dynamic, when you look back on it and have on this side of it, it's like, it's not just that it's wrong to teach kids that they're wicked and, deserving of eternal punishment. It's just honestly really weird. It's like, this is some weird stuff. Weird. And then you look at like even basic stuff like eat my flesh and drink my blood. You're like, this is some weird stuff. And
now I look at it and I'm like, what? Like, why are we drinking like blood and eating someone's body? Like at the time that was so normal. Like if you didn't do it, like there's something, like you're a bad person.
Yeah.
Now I look at it and first I don't want to step inside a church again because of trauma. But if I did, for some reason, like I would not take communion. Like I just would not be able to do it. Like it's just so creepy and weird to me.
How do you do with like funerals and weddings? Do you do okay with those if you have to step into a church?
So I haven't really been to church since 2020. Okay. When the church is closed. So I haven't really been into any funerals or anything yet. So I don't really know. At this point in life, I can't really step inside a church right now. There's just too many triggers, too much pain. It's still too raw. And anger, which it's confusing though, because some of the churches that I know of do great things. But then I know of churches that don't do good things, but it's hard.
Just to give a quick anecdote from my story, and I want to get right back to yours. So I deconverted in October of 2019 after about 2 to 3 years of very intense study. But my dad had passed away earlier that year, like March of 2019. And at his funeral, which was at a church, of course, up in Pennsylvania, he he had been just a jerk, a horrible man to me. He had told me at one point, he wished I'd never been born. He told me to get out of his house many times. It was a very weird dynamic. I don't think it was about me. Just he had some demons in his closet that we still don't know some of them. But I remember at the time thinking, I don't have much good to say about him, but I want to obviously be at his funeral and be respectful. So I didn't speak. Like my siblings all spoke, but I didn't speak. I just sat there with our first two kids who were born at the time, just sat there and, attended the funeral, was done. But I look back now thinking, okay, 6 months later, you literally deconverted. And I've imagined what would it have been like if I had deconverted before then, and was like, that would have been my first time in church after deconversion. And I don't know, but I would like to think that I'd kind of be dangerous. Like, I'd be like, give me the mic. I have a few things to say, This is crazy. And I don't think, whenever that happens next that I have a chance to speak, I think I'm going to ask for the mic and I'm going to have a few things to say.
You should do it.
I think they're probably going to ask me to leave when I'm done speaking. Anyway, I digress. I do want to ask you one more question and then go back to where we dropped off. The purity culture thing.
Yes.
I've talked to a lot of people about this and I want to just get your thoughts on it. But one of the things that really stands out to me is that people in purity culture feel inherently sinful just because of who they are. And one of the things I'll give a guy's perspective and then an example from girls, and then you can tell me if you relate to this at all. But like for a guy, if a guy ever got an erection, like at school, it was like super embarrassing, even if it wasn't sexual. It just happened to happen. Sometimes it just happened. And you'd have this mild erection. It was extremely embarrassing, especially if you had to stand up in the next 2 or 3 minutes. You're like, I really want to stay sitting down until this is over. But it was very, very embarrassing. And I've spoken to some ladies who've said that for the women who were larger or curvier, that there was like an inherent badness to that, like that somehow the girls who were maybe skinnier, more petite, had it. It was easier for them to hide their curves because they weren't as pronounced, but that the girls were, just by virtue of walking slowly, their large breasts are going to bounce around, or they walk outside and it's cold, and if they're wearing a thin bra or something, their nipples are going to poke through, and just by virtue of the fact that they're a woman with large curves is going to draw attention to them. And I was speaking to one lady who she was like a worship leader. And at times she would get excited, praising the Lord. And she got reprimanded by people saying you are a distraction. And she was just standing on stage, excited for the Lord. But the fact that she had curves was an inherent distraction, so to speak, to the men.
Right.
And it really makes me feel bad for everybody, but certainly for the people for whom it's more of an issue to say, you have this sense of you can't be safe in your own skin. Just walking down the street or walking into church, the fact that you have curves that you can't hide unless you're wearing a big fur coat or something, you can't hide the fact that you've got curves, and you are going to be tempting men just by the fact that you exist. Did that resonate with you or anyone you spoke to? Or just how do we be safe in our own skin and then enjoy being who we are?
Yeah. I mean, there was never feeling safe in your own skin for me growing up. I think, being in an inner city church with a lot of people of color, most women were kind of big and curvy. So it was just shame all around. I don't think even the skinny girls got away. It was very, the church I was at was very legalistic in the way we wore, what we wore. And
no cleavage and long dresses.
Yeah, there was basically a dress code for the members and youth group and stuff. You would get in trouble if you were showing too much of your arm or too much of your chest. It doesn't even matter if you were developed or not. You were a little girl with nothing and you'd still have to cover your body. Yeah. So I experienced all of that, but it was never kind of just certain types of body types. It was all women from my experience. And then people would definitely look down upon you if you, honestly, I think from where the church I was at, because of just the demographic, the skinny girls would probably end up being more almost looked at as sluttish, because they were, I think, almost because they could get away with certain outfits.
Yeah.
They would have a kind of a bad reputation of just being just more slutty,
Yeah,
I guess.
like the curvy girls knew to always stay modest because they could.
Yes.
They could be
Yeah,
silly.
I think that's a really good way to explain it. Yeah. If you're on the bigger side or curvy, or you're just going to be modest or going to be covered up, versus the skinny girls can kind of get away with wearing smaller clothing or tighter clothing. And so they would be looked at as more of the slutty girls. So I was never one of those girls. So I was very good at kind of fitting in the background. I was very, yeah.
The reason I bring it up is it amazes me a couple things. Keep this short so we can get back to the story, but it amazes me that within this context, you really do lose the ability to just love being who you are. Like, just, I'm so glad. And you kind of do theologically.
Not even love. You like yourself. You can't even like who you are.
Yeah. You just feel like you're constantly dirty. And I know for guys, one of the issues it creates is this double life where you end up kind of theologically loving yourself, thinking I'm redeemed, I'm a child of God, I'm written in the Lamb's Book of Life. If you're a Calvinist, you know, God elected me. I am in a privileged position, and I know that I'm secure in Christ. And you feel like I'm theologically, technically loved, but you just feel like, number one, God can see inside your head, and so you're always being judged. And so when a guy would look and you know, just be honest, you know, guys would on the facade, the good facade, say, you know, I might accidentally see something, but I'm not going to look twice. I mean, guys, be honest. You'd look 2, 3, 4 times when no one else was looking. And that shame, that double life where you're like,
girls look too. Yeah. Girls look too. And, you know, you be at youth camp and you have these boys, they don't have to wear shirts, you know, over their bathing suits. You know, it's like, what's the double standard here?
Yeah. But it amazes me that you really don't ever get that message. Like I would have expected it to be like this. And I know this is idealistic, so pardon me for being this way, but I would have expected it to be like this. Love your body, love sexuality. It's beautiful. It's awesome. Your body's amazing. And then, like, after you've said that 1,000 times, by the way, this is also very powerful. If you're not careful, like anything good, it can be used in a way that's going to damage your life and your future. But to have some parameters that protect you, your heart, your body, but celebrate it at the same time, as opposed to just bad. Oh, and by the way, it's really good. And you when you set up that message of so much dirtiness, you really end up with double lives. And I know it seems like to me, maybe it's just the Facebook pages I follow, but it seems like there's constantly stories coming out of people in ministry pastors and youth pastors who are getting caught doing bad things. And they're culpable for what they're doing, obviously. I'm not in any way excusing what they're doing. But it's like, we need to also, while we're trying to protect these churches and these kids, especially from predators, we need to also say there's a systemic problem here. You are encouraging men to have a double life where sexuality is not celebrated and it's not important, and yet internally they are.
I have a story about that. There was a girl in my children's ministry. She was my age, so we grew up together, and she had an older sister. It turned out her father had been raping her and her sister. And this man, he was very creepy. I remember he had to come up in front of the church and basically repent and, tell the church. So everyone knew about it, and he was gone for a few months. And then he ended up coming back, and that was it. Like, I even remember, being a little girl and thinking, like, something is not right. Like, this is not right. This man is creepy. I don't want to be around him. Mm-hmm. But, that was it. But I look back at that now, and I'm just thinking, like, what kind of message are you sending?
Yeah.
to people, in general. Like, so you can just go and do these horrible, disgusting, some of the worst things you can do. And all you have to do is like say you're sorry, and then it's as if it didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really both sides. That's a good point. We've got the setup, the Josh Duggars of the world, where it's like you're set up to fail from day one. But then you've got people actually taking a bad start and actually doing bad things as a result of it.
And it protects them.
Protects them. Yeah. It's like, it's just the system is so messed up on both sides.
Disgusting. And that's one of the things that I look back and I'm so angry about. And I'm just thinking, like, why did my parents still even keep us there? Like, for me, if that happened, I'd like, we're gone. We're not coming back here. Like, this is not okay. Like, call the authorities. Like, this is disgusting. Why is this man here around all of these children?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just like it was just another Josh Duggar story. But yeah, it does create like this double life where it's almost not necessarily acceptable, but it enables it. It creates a safe space for that to happen.
Drives you into a closet, basically.
The pastor of the church that I grew up in, actually, he retired recently, and he admitted to sexually assaulting a underage girl back in the day. Like, it was from years. It was from when he was really young, before I was even born. But then that makes me think, like, okay, so out of all those years I was at that church and everyone basically worshiped this pastor, that's what he was hiding. And, how many other stories were out there? Like, I feel like he probably had to tell that story because it came to light. I don't know the whole thing, but I can't imagine like what other stories were there.
Yeah. And they come out of the woodwork these days. We're seeing them all over the place.
I know,
so many
everywhere.
Stories.
And, when you find out, oh my gosh, it was my church too, then you're just like, everything. Like, that was definitely a part of, everything just fell apart. Like, I just couldn't, nothing made sense anymore.
It's like Christians keep acting like, and I'm sorry for the side part of this, but it just seems like they're acting like, well, that was a one-off lone wolf factor. That was like an exception. And like, how many times you're going to say that was an exception? And it's like on a radar, you have, the circle where, and whenever there's a plane, it goes beep, beep. And at first you just see the one dot, like, okay, there's one plane. And all of a sudden you're like seeing 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 planes. It's like, come on, the radar is showing there's planes all over the place. This is not a one-off. It's not. I mean, this is a systemic, your system is designed to get the results, exactly the results it's getting. And you are driving, it's driving people into double lives. And it's just, it's sad too, because there's no reason to do this. Josh Duggar, for example, he could have been taught healthy sexuality, certainly healthy boundaries with his sisters and so forth. He could have been taught that it's beautiful, and to, just have a really solid starting point. I mean, he still could have done some bad things, who knows, but he could have at least had a fighting chance to have a healthy sexuality, and they just deprived him of that. And then he took it and obviously ran with it. But it breaks my heart. And it also breaks my heart too, that a lot of people even people who do the right thing, so to speak, as from the church's perspective, when they finally get married, they don't really enjoy it that much. Like, you can't flip that switch because you've been told bad, bad, bad. And then you get married. It's like, okay, now, act like you're just loving this. It's like, well, I can't because I thought it was so dirty for so long.
Yep. And I'm still getting to that in my story.
Well, can I get back to your story by asking about the suicide then?
Yes.
My point in asking about the relationship with Christ was, when you're back at this suicidal point, where did Christ fit into this in terms of being your hope and your foundation and your groundedness, your bulwark? If he's the cornerstone of your life, and he's your vision is fixed on him, how does that translate into, but I want to end my life? What I mean? Like, it seems like on the surface that there must have been some sense in which Jesus being your all in all kind of depreciated to get to that point.
Yes. So I think one part of it was obviously trauma. I had been sexually assaulted. So I think that really just messed with my brain chemistry. And I already struggled with anxiety and depression and self-esteem growing up. And then I think after I was raped, and then I, was in a very toxic relationship. And actually that boyfriend at the time raped me as well. He actually drugged me and raped me at one point. And I thought I had to marry this guy, because we had sex, we were sexually active. So I had to marry him so I could somehow keep my promise to God in some way. So I think when I found out he was cheating on me and, we broke up, at that point, I felt like I was worthless. I felt like there wasn't even a chance for me to be in heaven. I think I thought that I was too much of a disgrace to be worthy of God in any way. I didn't want to exist anymore. I couldn't handle it. I just wanted to end it all, to get away. I didn't want to think anymore. My whole life I'd lived for Christ, and I no longer felt that I was worthy of Christ at that point.
Can I ask about that? Theologically, the Christians that I would have grown up with would have said, you are in exactly the right spot at that point.
Right.
Because they would have said, you shouldn't feel worthy. You should feel like Christ is worthy. You should not feel righteous. You should feel like Christ is righteous. You should not feel good. You should feel like Christ is good. You should not feel okay with yourself. You should feel okay with what God did for you. Did that help at all, knowing that that was theologically perhaps the right party line?
So I did end up clinging to my faith through that period of time. Once I got kind of past that episode of wanting to commit suicide and, planning and, luckily I had a roommate who, was able to kind of step in, and I was able to get help, and I was on suicide watch at the school. And, but I really did end up clinging to my faith. And I remember, my family was in Chicago, but I was in Jackson, Mississippi. And so I ended up calling my mom every morning, or my grandma, whoever was able to talk, and we would read scripture and pray before each class, or before, every morning. And that helped me get through that hard period. It's kind of interesting to think about, because I feel like Christianity is the reason I got to that horrible place, but then it helped me get out. It's really weird. Because I did really cling to that, like, oh, Jesus is everything. He's my strength. He's, I can't do this without him. And, me repenting and saying how sorry I am for, being a slut, I guess.
It seems like that's part of the inherent hook of it, is that they have a way of saying constantly, if you're not thriving, if you're not joyful, then you're just seeing it wrong. You're seeing the Bible wrong. You're seeing God wrong. And so it's this constant attempt to say, this system isn't wrong. Your interpretation of the system, or application of it, or lack of it, is wrong. And it's like an addiction. Like, you just keep on coming back and saying, I need a different fix. The fix I had wasn't working. Can I have twice the dose or something? And there's never this system of saying, never an opening to say, maybe this whole thing is actually the cause of it. And I think that's a big reason that what you're saying is a lot of us don't escape, because we keep going back saying,
like Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, like, I'm the one that's doing this. I must be messed up. And even when you leave, you have Christians say it, like, I'm really sorry that you weren't in the right church. I'm really sorry you didn't get under the right teachers.
All the time. All the time. Every day. People saying like, oh, I'm sorry that was your experience. And I pray that you, find the truth of Christ and, get past all the lies you were told. And it's like, you don't get it.
Yeah, I don't. At that point, were you, before you kind of take us into the kind of maybe the switch over part of the story, were you at that point yet actually questioning your faith at all? Like, were you saying, in any way, I wonder if this is actually real?
I think there was a short period within that time where I did start questioning. I remember because I ended up seeing a school therapist. I was required to. And I remember her saying to me, okay, you need to go find a Presbyterian church and, saying this and that. And I was like, wait a minute. Wait, this is your response? Like, this is what you're telling me? And like, I remember even, I got really angry for, a short period of time. And I remember even saying to her, like, I don't understand this anymore. Is God looking down at us, like with a magnifying glass, like ants, and just, laughing at our pain? Like, I remember saying that to her, and she kind of like stepped back and was like, I don't know. I can't answer those questions for you. Like, you just have to have faith. And, but there was a short period of time where I was just angry, because I was like, my whole childhood, I lived for Christ. I really tried to do everything right. And then all of a sudden, all these horrible things happened to me, which of course I blamed myself, but it was almost like I felt like, does God enjoy this? Is he enjoying my suffering right now? There was, but then I ended up falling back and, felt like I had fallen away from God and had to kind of crawl my way back and repent and say sorry for, rebelling or whatever I was doing. But yeah, there was a short time where I was questioning. I do remember that.
Was this about the time then that after your suicidal time?
Yes.
Was that when you started to begin to move toward your deconversion, or was there anything else that happened first?
This was a short, yeah. So I feel like there was a shift because I was different now. I was no longer that innocent Christian girl anymore. I was an adult, and I was assaulted. I was no longer a virgin. All of that was basically taken away from me. So I had to find some sort of new identity. So I think for a time, I kind of just, to get out of that depression, I was able to, like I said, I was praying every day. And I think once I finally got out of the depression part, I was like, you know what? I just want to have fun now. I can't handle this anymore. Like, what's the point? Yeah. So I ended up partying a lot. I ended up doing drugs. I was violently date raped at school. And I remember, like, there was a lot of blood. And I ended up going to the doctor, and I didn't say I was raped because I didn't think I was. Like, I feel like since that first assault that had happened and the way my parents handled it, I didn't understand how rape worked, because you're kind of told like, oh, it's someone in a dark alley who's going to like jump out and get you. And that was never my experience. I always felt like I put myself in those situations, or I led the guy on, or I asked for it. So I remember being sexually assaulted by another guy at a party. I actually met my husband at this school, which I think was probably the best part of the school. Was he actually saved me a few times. I think he saved me from being date raped at one point, or not date raped, sorry, gang raped by the soccer team. He kind of was able to step in, and like, I was just so unprepared. I was 19 at this point, so unprepared for adulthood and life and just how the world worked. I was taught to be submissive to men. And even though I was not like a part of the church at this time, I still had that mindset of being like, hi, I'm the Christian girl. And it was very easy for people to take advantage of me, because I was just always so nice. And I just thought, I always called it like my slutty phase. My husband at the time, he was also struggling with depression. He had a dysfunctional family. I'm not going to go into his story, but he had his own issues. And so we were kind of able to bond over that. And we both ended up failing out. And so I moved back to Chicago and he followed. He was a dancer. And so there were dance opportunities here in the city. So he came back or came here as well. I moved home with my parents, and my parents were very angry and unhappy with me. They ended up forcing me into a outpatient program, which
For the drug addiction?
I did need help. Yeah, it was for addiction. It was weird. It was like for smoking weed. And I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which I now know I don't have. I have complex PTSD, which makes a lot more sense with everything that I've been through. And I remember I ended up being kicked out of my parents' house because I slept over at my, husband's. We were just dating at the time. And my parents basically said, like, you either have to live here under our rules or you have to leave. And so that didn't really give me a choice. So it was basically, I have to be a prisoner here and have to conform to what they want, go back to church and be this, basically felt like I had to go back to where I was. And there was this no way. I couldn't do that again. I couldn't do it anymore. I wanted to be myself. So Justin and I, that's my husband's name. We ended up just being two kids in the city, having fun, just trying to survive, figuring. We stayed in like this closet, basically renting for $250 a month. And there were cockroaches. It was horrible. I had to find my first job, and we've struggled a lot. Like, we didn't have help. Well, we had a little bit of help, but it was tough because I always felt, even though I felt like I was finally living, making my own decisions, I still felt all of this shame that the reason the way my life was going the way it was because of my choices, was because of my sinful decisions, was because of that slutty phase that I went through, which was just 2 years full of rape. So see, I laugh because that's my, I don't fully know how to feel those emotions yet, which I'm working on. I still have not cried about anything that has happened to me. Cause I guess I just got so numb. I don't even fully know how to feel the pain that I've been through. It's really weird. But yeah, so there's a lot of pressure because my husband and I were living in sin, or my boyfriend at the time, we were living in sin. So we got engaged. And then we got married. And after we got married, things got very weird for me sexually. Not for, my husband, wasn't support, like, he grew up in a Catholic church, but wasn't deep into the church like I was. So he didn't have like all that indoctrination. So for me, all of a sudden, marriage became more like a job. Sex became more like a job. And it became hard for me to even enjoy it. And I'm still to this day, like, basically my daughter was born in 2018. And then after she was born, that's when I kind of tried to get back involved with the church. I think I felt worthy all of a sudden. I think because I was married and I had a child, and I was like, oh, I need to bring my daughter up in the church so she doesn't make the same mistakes I did. So, and then 2020 came, and that kind of really changed the way I saw the church. And then I had all these memories resurface of my past assaults. And I start to realize, like, wait a second, I didn't like those experiences. They were terrifying. Those were actually horrible, horrible experiences. And then I'm like, wait, I've blamed myself my entire life. I've been trying to make up, basically. Like, I feel like I had been trying to make up my whole life for what had happened to me when I was 17. So it was basically 10 years. I was 27 turning 28, and my first rape was when I was 17. So it took about 10 years, and I finally realized there's something is not right here.
You mentioned 2020. What particular things? I know a lot of things happened then, but
a lot of things happened.
Triggered it.
So I think one part of it was church closed. Being in the city, they had to take it a lot more serious because the numbers were higher. So everything shut down. Churches were closed. I know there were some churches that stayed open in other areas, but not in the city. So I think being cut off from the church for a period of time. And then, so during this time, I actually was living with my family. After my daughter was born, when she turned around 1, she got very sick. And she got a urinary tract infection that spread to her kidney. So she was hospitalized. And so I ended up, I had to take off work. I was in the hospital with her, breastfeeding. And then my husband was kind of in and out of the hospital, and we just couldn't afford our apartment anymore. We were getting eviction notices. So we ended up having to sublease. We did go to the church for help. This was in 2019. I remember going to the church for help, like crying my eyes out, saying like what we were going through. And they did nothing to help us. There were some very kind people in my small group that helped us here and there. Like I remember someone bought us a car seat for when my daughter grew out of her baby car seat. And sometimes people brought us meals, and like they were great. And I am so appreciative of them and so thankful. But the church as a whole, it was like they didn't even care. And I served in the children's ministry. My husband did the coffee every week. He works at Starbucks. And so he would bring free coffee. And yeah, I remember going to them crying, saying like, we're literally going to be evicted. And my parents did not want us to move in with them, but we ended up having to do that at the last minute because we didn't have a choice. So anyway, so I was with my parents at this time. I was back under their roof. And then because of COVID, everyone came home. So I was home under the roof with all of my siblings again. So it was weird. Like we're all adults now. My youngest brother, he was 19. Yeah. So yeah, we were all adults living at home, 4 kids, adult kids, my husband, my baby, 2 dogs. It was quite hectic. And you just start to kind of reevaluate everything, and almost being back in that deja vu moment of, almost feeling like a child again.
Yeah.
And I just kind of, everything just started to like spin. And I was like, wait, what is going on here? And then with the church, the murder of George Floyd, there were the riots. And so I was still watching the virtual church services. And so I remember they did one message on like racism and how that's wrong, blah, blah, blah. And so the church that we actually had started attending after we got married was supposed to be like a progressive church in the city. They were right outside. They're very close to Moody Bible Institute. I don't know if you're familiar with them. Right. So there was actually like a branch off of Moody Bible Institute, but they were right outside of this very historical row housing community, like Section 8 housing. I'm not going to name it because I don't want to put that out there, but it was, so part of the reason I joined this church was because they were across the street from this very, literally it was like a block that was left from this huge complex that was, back in the 80s, it was famous for being a really, really bad Section 8 housing. But all that's left is like these row houses, and it's gated. They have a fence around them with cops on each side. So literally these people like are kept in a cage. And so I went there thinking like, oh, we're going to, help these people, because that's why I go to church. I want to be part of the community. And that's also what the church I grew up in was a church that kind of, they work with it. They work with the community. But this church was not that. Their goal was actually to have a church in every single neighborhood of Chicago, which is a lot of neighborhoods, which I think is really strange, when they literally have people in their backyard who need help. I remember really trying to get involved and like kind of talking to leadership. And one of the pastors there listened. And so we would do things, we would go over there, we would kind of do barbecues and things like that. And then they ended up transferring him and he left. And then after that, they like no longer started going to that community, which was so weird because it was literally in their backyard. And there were a lot of rich people at this church, lots of rich white people. I went there because one, they had a Saturday night service, which that is what worked with our schedule. And then two, they were right by this community that I wanted to serve. And that just was not their goal. So anyway, back to George Floyd and the riots. They did this message on that and how, it's just racism is bad, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, okay, good. I'm glad they're addressing this. And there was one Black pastor at this church. And I remember because I was asking him like, okay, what's the church doing? What's the church going to do about this and everything that was happening? Because there were protests and there were some churches that were doing like marches. That's what they called them, marches. And the one Black pastor, I guess he was doing it. And I remember asking my small group leader, who was also one of the pastors, I said, oh, so like, what are we doing? When are we going to go to this march? Like, when are we? And he's like, I don't know. I don't know I'm like, well, you should know. You should know. Like, what is the community in your backyard? And like, it's a Black community and they're struggling. There's been riots. There's, stores that have been destroyed and you're going to do nothing. Like the next week they were talking about missions. Like at that point I was like, okay, this is not right. I can't be a part of this. Obviously all you want is money for missions. That's your goal. And like the city was crazy at this point. It's Chicago and there were marches, there were riots and protests. And, I'm like, I want to go protest. I want to be out there talking about how, like, this is like, why are we doing anything? Basically, that's how I felt. I was like, why are we not doing anything? And you guys are claiming to be progressive, to stand for social justice, and you're not doing anything. You did one message on racism, and there were a lot of Trump supporters. And I think like just with that election and then all of that, it started to not make sense anymore.
Yeah.
I'm like, why am I here? Why is anybody here? Like, what is even happening? Like, I don't. And then I had a close friend who was in my small group. She had a son who was young. And then the pastor who was in our small group, he had a daughter. They were young, like probably like 7 and 8. They ended up showing each other their privates, I guess, and they got it on camera at the church. And so this mother, she ended up having to leave the church. And she was devastated. And I don't know all the details, but I just know the way they handled it. I just remember one week she just was no longer there. And I didn't understand. And then another friend in my small group told me what happened. And I was like, wait, what? She had to leave because it happened? Like, that's what leadership decided, that because that happened because between two small children, which happens. I'm not saying it's okay, but I mean, we go and get professionals to discuss this. Like, you don't just, oh, you have to leave now. And so I just started questioning everything. And
it seems like it's been a perfect storm, honestly, for a lot of good reasons, bad reasons, but good reasons. Like YouTube and the internet in general exploded over the last 10 years. And then COVID and Trump, and it's like people all over, and other reasons too, but people are just saying,
not going to church and like kind of having that disconnect of having to go every day or every Sunday religiously kind of like breaks that like dependence almost in a way. And you start to think for yourself because you don't have that regular brainwashing happening almost.
You could see the churches fighting back. I mean, I'm sure part of it was just they felt like they wanted to have church, but I bet they probably sense that threat of like, if people feel like life is okay without coming, where does that leave us? Like, we're going to be out of a job.
Yep.
And so many churches would fight back in the name of freedom, in the name of liberty. And it's like, you're afraid that your job is going to go away because people realize they don't need church. And, you know, you can call it whatever you want, but the reality is you're now in the bullseye as the pastors in the churches. And I was loving it, to be honest. The fact that this whole scenario, as horrible as it's been, has led so many people to question, do I even need to be there? It's awesome.
Yes.
I mean, that's been, if there's anything good that's come out of this, that's definitely one of the few things that's been great.
I agree. The same thing. And it's funny because I remember when it first happened, everyone was talking about, oh, this is going to bring so many people to Jesus. And I feel like it's done the opposite.
Yeah.
I feel like more people are leaving now. But I think that, and then on top of having those memories resurface of my assaults and just realizing I've been trying to, like, I've lived my life trying to make up for what happened to me. And there were things that happened to me, not something I did to myself. I realized I just had to make some changes. And then I came across the I Survived, I Kissed Dating Goodbye documentary. I think they took it down. But I did watch that, and that really opened my eyes. And I realized, wait a minute, I am not the only one who is going through this. And it just, I'm not the biggest fan of Joshua Harris, but I do respect that he has taken responsibility for some of the damage that he's done, and that he is sharing those stories. And so then I started to realize, like, wait, there has to be more. They can't just be this, like, there has to be more. And so I read the book Pure by Linda K. Klein, and that's full of stories. And then I read You Are Your Own by Jamie Lee Finch, and that changed my life as well. And I remember reading these books. At this point, I had no plan of like leaving Christianity whatsoever. And then this is when I came across the Life After podcast. And so it was that. And then I started just listening to tons of podcasts. And then I found, the Facebook group. And I think that's when I found you. You were on Facebook. And so I started watching your channel. And then Myth Vision and, a whole bunch of stuff. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, it was almost scary at first. I was like, wait. I don't want to hear all of this. Like, what is happening right now? Like, I had no intention of like leaving Christianity. I just wanted to like understand the purity culture and how that had affected me. And then it just got to a point where I was like, even the religious scholars, Bible scholars, don't agree on what the Bible says.
Yep.
So how does anyone know? And then, you start to realize a bunch of white men put this book together in Europe and then brought it over here. There's so many other books that aren't even in this, like some stuff was taken out. And then I was looking into how they had specific books for slaves where they took out some stuff. They took the stuff about freedom out and they put the stuff in about like obeying your master, and they used that. And then, they used Christianity to justify genocide of the Native Americans. And it's just everything like just started to just spin, and something just clicked in my brain. And I was like, wait, I was duped. I can't believe I fell for this. Like, and I know you say this all the time, but it was like I was in the Matrix. And all of a sudden I got out, And it's like, you can't go back.
Yeah.
Once you see it, you can't go back. Like, it's not, I didn't do it on purpose, you know? And sometimes I even have moments where I'm like, I wish that I could go back to that, like being so naive and just having that certainty, but you can't, because I've seen the truth. I've seen it, and I can no longer go back. And I'm in therapy for trauma and beginning my healing process. And it's been a long, long journey. I have a long way to go, but I started TikTok in the last year or so, because I was actually just listening to other stories. And then I realized how much other people's stories were helping me. And so I was like, well, I might as well just start sharing my thoughts. And so I started doing that. And then I just kind of started interacting with people, and it's been very, very therapeutic. And yeah, I just think people telling their stories, I feel like the more and more people tell their stories, the less you can silence us.
Yeah.
I feel like eventually, like something has to change. I just feel like something is going to change. And I know you were talking about like the project you're working on, and you're thinking, well, maybe nothing will happen. I feel like something has to happen at this point with the internet and just all the access to information that we have. Like, we're not stuck in this little evangelical Americanized colonial bubble anymore. Like there's so much information out there. And even when you start to realize, like, there's thousands of interpretations of the Bible, how can you even believe that your one version is the right version? Like, it doesn't make sense. And then you start to realize, like, wait, why are we drinking blood and eating someone's body? And then it's like, why did God have to sacrifice someone in the first place?
Yeah.
Why can he just forgive us?
And why does he want the end of little boys' penises cut off? And
oh my gosh. I don't know if you've watched it at all, but there's a channel called Dark Matter. And he just does he does little cartoons.
Oh yes, the cartoons, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, he does the cartoons. And that has really helped me a lot too. And that was, I remember one of the episodes that was talking about, you know, the penises being cut off. And it's so ridiculous, all of it. And I'm just like, I can't believe I fell for it. But then I'm like, I didn't know anything else. I literally was raised inside this tiny bubble of, you know, Baptist, evangelical, homeschool, you know, cult-like, you know, quiverful. You know, I didn't know anything else. I didn't have the ability to even process other information. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of anger I'm processing.
Do you feel like that anger is against people like that indoctrinated you, or against, like, some people say, I know God doesn't exist, but I still feel angry at the God voice in my head. Like, I feel angry. It's like, are you angry at God, or are you angry at yourself? And it kind of blends a little bit. Like, I'm kind of angry at myself for believing it, but I feel like at first I was angry at God, like, you know, you were a liar this whole time, and then you realize you can kind of switch and stop blaming God, because like you can't blame someone who doesn't exist. It's like blaming Santa Claus. It's like you begin to shift it more to yourself and your indoctrinators. But
I laid so I remember laying on my bed in my room, staring at the ceiling, and I said, okay, God, if you're real, you need to show me right now. Reveal yourself to me right now. Like, I need some actual proof. Nothing happened, of course. And I was like, I'm done. If you're not going to like come here and reveal yourself to me like you did to Moses in a burning bush, or, you know, like all these other ways that they talk about, you know, these supernatural ways, if you can't like give me some physical proof, then I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to play this game.
Yeah.
What is the point? It's hurting me. It's all it has done is like made me want to kill myself and doubt myself and hate myself. Like, I'm learning to like myself for the first time in my life. And I feel free for the first time in my life.
That's awesome.
It's like I lived in a prison my whole life, like, you know, afraid afraid of the world, afraid of myself, afraid of what's going to happen after. And now I'm like, I don't really care. I call myself an agnostic atheist because I don't really have proof that there's no God. I don't have proof that there is a God.
Yeah.
You
just know it's got nothing to do with Yahweh and Jesus.
Nothing to do with Yahweh or Jesus, or to me, anything of these earthly deities. If anything, it's a multiverse, and there's something way bigger that we can't even that's what I'm thinking about now. I love watching space videos and learning about the universe and things, because I didn't do this before, because before I believed in young earth. Yeah. And so now I love learning about the Big Bang and the universe, and just realizing how small and insignificant the earth is compared to everything else. I'm it's almost arrogant to think that, some deity only cares about our little group when there's so much else going on. And it's almost a relief not having to know, not having to be certain. I think before that was scary. I remember thinking before, without God, I have no purpose. But now I can create my own purpose, which is, being a doula and helping women, and especially women of color, getting through birth and, advocating for themselves and just giving them that knowledge that they need, to be safe. To me, that gives me purpose. I have purpose in raising my own kids and wanting them to just be happy with themselves and confident in themselves. And just, I feel like I can love people more genuinely now. I think a lot of the anger I feel now is towards how the church has treated the LGBTQ community. That is something that is, I have gay friends. Two of my best friends are gay. And there was always this part of me that, Chicago has a huge pride parade, and I would never go every year because there was a part of me that felt that's sinful. Even though I supported my friends and I love my friends, and I always considered myself to be more on the progressive side of Christianity, there was always that part of me that felt that's still sinful. But I can't judge them for it. But now I see it and I'm I can't believe that I was brainwashed to think that way. And it makes me so angry that I would even think less of someone in any sort of way.
And that God was definitely going to judge them for their lifestyle.
Yes, absolutely. And I see it still on Facebook because Facebook is old. So I've had it for a long time. So a lot of the people on there are people from my childhood and from church. And so I still see it all the time. And it makes me so angry because they don't realize how damaging it is. Because I know, obviously I'm not LGBTQ, but I have sexual trauma, and I know how the church forced me to repress my sexuality, and so I was not prepared when it came to to when I did experience it. I didn't understand. And the shame that I felt. And then you hear about children killing themselves. There's an issue here. This is a problem. You should be more concerned that children are killing themselves than, they're whatever, love the sin or hate the sin. No, that's not loving someone at all. And there's a lot of anger right now that I'm going through. I think it's been just about 2 years that I officially started deconstructing in 2020, and it's a lot to process.
When you got to that point where you said you're out, and one of the things that happens, of course, at that point is the ramifications start to hit where you're at first you're just questioning, is this even real or not?
Yeah.
But then you don't realize it, but then it's kind of you know how they talk about the issue with the satellites in space, where like if for some reason two of them were to ever smash together, part of the problem is it creates like 10,000 little pieces of metal that are
Mhm.
zooming around the Earth at
Right.
astronomical speeds, and it's just really really scary how much debris is happening. But it's
Mhm.
almost like you don't realize you're deconstructing, deconverting, and how what's going to happen, but you're just first dealing with the whole smash, the impact. But
Yes.
then once the impact is done and you kind of get over the first shock, you're like, there's a lot of debris now. There's a lot of ramifications. And one of the parts that I think for me was hard, and I know other people talk about it, is just the afterlife, dealing with what happens. And if you would agree, as my perspective is that nothing happens. We're glorified primates, so to speak. We're conscious primates. I shouldn't say glorified. We're conscious primates that we're amazing. It's amazing what's happened evolutionarily, but there's no afterlife. There's as much of an afterlife for us as there is for a turtle or a rat or a bug.
Mhm.
And if you realize that in the context of, I thought I was going to heaven, I thought I was
Right.
going to see grandmom so and so and uncle so and so that died of cancer at super young. Like I thought I was going to see these people, and I thought I was going to be whole again. I thought I was going to dance for the Lord and be joyful and enjoy just the mysteries that like C.S. Lewis talked about in the end of the Chronicles of Narnia. Like there's the chapters never end, and every chapter gets
Mhm.
better than the last one.
Right.
And it's like that's what I thought was coming, and now I realize none of it's there. It's hard to deal with, but it's also an anger thing. Like, oh my gosh, like, so this is it? Like I get a max like 80, 90 years at best, and I've wasted half of them on Jesus
Yes. And
garbage.
that's another reason why I get so angry is that I can't believe I spent a decade hating myself. I could have
Mm,
been so much more productive. Uh, who knows where I would have been, if I had dealt with this sooner.
yeah.
Um, maybe those things wouldn't have even happened to me. Like, I don't know. It's, I can't go and change the past, but it's very angering to think that I'm 29 now. I'll be 30 this year. I feel like I'm mourning my 20s right now.
Yeah.
That I feel like I didn't really get to enjoy my young adulthood because yes, I had fun. Um, but at the same time, I was miserable. I wasn't happy with myself. I hated myself. I was ashamed. And it makes me angry that it's like I'm able to look at myself in a different light now. Like I can look at myself and say, like, oh, I was a child, I was a young person, and it's really sad what happened to me. Whereas before, it was kind of like, oh, I shouldn't complain. I need to be thankful for what I do have. You know, it's a blessing that Jesus even forgives me. And, now I see it in a whole other different way now. Now I can actually care about myself and be like, wait, those things that happened to me were not okay. The
Yeah.
way I felt about myself is not okay. That is not normal. That is unhealthy and shouldn't happen to anyone and I don't want it to happen to anyone else. And I'm sure, and that's why I think sharing my story is so important, because I know there are people going through it. I've spoken to other people who are going through similar things, and it makes me so sad. And I look at my daughter and I'm like, this is the last thing I would want for her. But at the same time, I'm like terrified because I know that's how my mom was. She wanted a better life for her kids. And look what happened. So now I'm, in therapy trying to find the balance there because I'm like, I don't want to traumatize my kids. And, and so it is a lot. It is like everything, the shit just hit the fan. And I'm sorry. I can't,
Oh, you can
I don't
curse so much, huh?
okay. That's another thing. I can say what I want now. I don't have to feel bad about it.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
It's like I constantly, it's so weird because I'm still constantly talking to God. It's like almost like it's still a part of me. And so I have to almost tell myself all the time, like, okay, I'm not talking to anything. Like I'm
yeah.
just talking to myself, and I don't need to be so hard on myself and judging myself all the time. Like
Mm,
I can just I could just live and
yeah.
not be, thinking about every single thought that I'm having. And is this thought okay?
Yeah.
You know,
Am I
every
taking it
single
captive for Christ?
decision, yeah, every single decision you make and do was always, is this, is this will this glorify Christ? Is this a sin? Is this good, bad? Now I don't have to go through all of that. I can just be.
Yeah.
And it's so freeing. And it's very upsetting when I realize that I've lived in a mental prison my whole life, except for, the past 2 years.
Good way to put it.
And I'm still learning new things about myself. I'm still remembering new things. Like the trauma is still very fresh. It's hard.
Yeah. I love too that you talked about the idea of, you get to create your own purpose. I mean, I know Dan Barker's got a book on that too, but just the idea that one of the biggest parts of this, and you mentioned Stockholm syndrome, but one of the biggest parts of this that really just pulls at my heartstrings so much when I see people going through this is they say, and I've seen this in print, and I'm sure people have felt this, but they say something like, if God isn't real, if Christianity is not real, I feel like I don't have a reason to live. Like, why would I want to live in a world without the hope of heaven and a God who has a plan for me? Where's my morality coming from?
I used to think.
All those questions. And for like, when you step back from it, you're like, so you think that if you don't believe in this ancient Canaanite mythology, that your worth is value? Like, would you? I mean, and I feel like begging the question, like, say that about Zeus, say that about Thor, say that about whatever other, Dionysius. Without Dionysius, my life is valueless. Like, really? And of course, they'd say, no, of course not. Dionysius is nothing. He's just a pretend Greek god. It's like, yeah, but your God is pretend too. And it's a real big testimony to me of like how bad these roots are. Like the tree roots just grow so deep in your psyche. And it brings up to me, you mentioned your child a few times, but the idea of being able to try at least, try to give the next generation a better chance, and to say, we're not going to give them a mythological worldview. Like, we're going to give them, they're still going to struggle with stuff, no doubt, but at least give them a fighting chance at reality.
Yeah.
And I love that that's a passion of yours too. And I really hope that we can begin to help people see more and more through these conversations and other venues, to say, this is not just an issue of, well, you believe what you would believe, want to believe, I believe what I want to believe. Like, it's not okay. And I know that
it's hurting people.
Yeah.
It's harmful.
Yeah. And I know some people want to say they want to toe that line really tight. And I kind of respect them a little bit, but I also disagree a lot, where I want to say, like, people want to say, oh, I don't care what you believe. I like studying the mythology of it. I like studying where it came from. But if you want to believe it, fine. But the thing is, it never stops there. They always feel the need to say, I need to pass this on to the next generation. Mm-hmm. And I need to describe it to them as if it's real. And, when you mentioned the Catholic Church with your husband, they have more statues than typically a Protestant church would. But when you think about like a Catholic kid looking up at a statue, and maybe in the Protestant church, it would have been a painting. But you think about this kid looking at the Christ on the cross with his arms, his arms and his feet nailed in, the crown of thorns, and the spear in his side. And you think, you're telling kids that torture that you're visually seeing is your fault. He's there. And if you were the only human that had been in the garden and had fallen, he would have had to do it for you, and he would have done it for you. You are that wicked. And you put that on a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old. I'm sorry, but I can't be equivocal and say, well, just you believe what you want to believe. I'll choose not to believe it. Like, no, this is child abuse. This is psychological child abuse. It is.
Because a kid doesn't know anything better. They don't know like, there's other world views out there. They don't know that. Yeah. Like I didn't know, and I wasn't Catholic, so I didn't have the statues, but definitely the paintings, and, being in Sunday school, and they have, the white Jesus. And that's another thing that really bothers me is, I grew up in an inner city church that's reaching, people of color, and then the Jesus is white and the leadership is white. That's another thing that just really bothers me, is like that, the white savior complex, and the whole, the colonial, like Americans don't even realize like where this came from at all.
Yeah.
And
Not at all.
And it's hard it's really difficult because I know it's so deep inside Black culture, but then I realize how it got into Black culture and how it was given to us. And it's really sad because I don't know the truth. And it's confusing. It's like when I feel like Christianity broke me, but then it also helped me get out of a dark place. So Christianity was used to justify slavery, but then it was also used to free. So it's really complicated and so manipulative. But you have to go all the way back to the origins. You have to go before, it was even in the West. You have to go before even Europe. You have to go back to like Africa. Like, where did it start? And why do we believe what we believe in? It's Christianity is not even the same outside of the US.
Yeah.
I know in Ethiopia, they still have the Book of Enoch.
Yeah.
And people are just ignorant. And I think it's really does a disservice that these pastors come out here and they're not teaching the truth. Like, I don't understand. I think I never went to seminary. So I think back and I look at Moody Bible Institute because it's a huge church here, in Chicago. I see it all the time. And I'm thinking, what are they teaching these people there? Obviously not like the Bible or the origins of the Bible. Like, isn't that what you're supposed to like learn when you take when you're in college? Like, I don't understand.
I went to Bible college. I went to Bob Jones, which you probably heard of. And I went to Lancaster Bible College in central Pennsylvania. And they do teach you the Bible, but they're teaching you the Bible in a very narrow grid. Like, they're teaching you with extreme blinders on. And they're teaching you the right interpretation and, of course, how to pass that on to other people. But yeah, when I left, it was after intense study. And I felt like, it was like, you guys never told me anything about where this thing came from.
I don't get it. Like, why aren't you telling the whole truth? Yeah. And that's when you start to realize, like, oh, this is a cult, because that's what cults do.
Yeah.
They don't give you the full truth. They only tell you the part they want you to know, so you can, keep giving them money.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, go ahead. No,
I was just going to say, speaking of Moody, I found out that they were covering up, sexual assault stories. Like, you can't trust anyone. And Moody, everyone worships Moody here. It's Chicago. Like, if you're in the Christian bubble of Chicago, like, Moody is it. And then you see, what they're doing, and it's just none of it's okay. Yeah. Like, I can't even see the good anymore. And it's hard because I do have friends that they live in one of the worst neighborhoods of Chicago. They have given their lives to this church, and they do things for the community that no one else is ever going to do. I see them doing really good things. Like, I remember when COVID hit and the schools shut down, no one, like, the teachers couldn't even find the kids. A lot of them were missing. And who went and found them? The church did. Like, these people who work at the church went door to door and had to find these kids to help them, got them computers, and, they do great, beautiful things, but at the same time, it's like, it's so conflicting now. I'm like, why is it that there has to be a deity involved in this? Yeah. Like, it's so confusing because on one side, there's people doing really great things, and then there's people that are just abusing their power and just want to control people. Yeah. And just want money.
It reminds me of back in the day, I used to do a lot of soup kitchens, and either I or someone else, we'd preach, and that if the people that were coming that were usually homeless, if they wanted to get their soup and bread, you had to sit for at least the 30, 45 minutes of the sermon. Yeah. And it very much strings attached. But I wanted to mention before we wrap up something else too about kids before I forget. Yeah. One of the things that I love being able to take all this. There's a lot of negative stuff that we've kind of touched on, but being able to give kids concrete ways to fight back. I'm just going to mention two things that I do. One of them is if you pretend, you've got a kid, there in front of you, and you push your hand toward their head and you tell them, I want you to take your hand and push my hand away. And as you're doing it, you say, I would like to tell you what you have to believe. And they'll push it away and say, get out of my worldview bubble. And or you say, you have to believe what I believe. And they push back, I don't have to believe what you believe. I do that with my kids on a regular basis, including myself. I'll say, you have to be an atheist. No, I don't. You have to be a Christian. No, I don't. And another thing is we do a lot of hand motions in our house, but I do a lot, I shouldn't say we. I do a lot of hand motions in my house with the kids to help them think through it. And I have a whole litany of, it's like 6 or 7 things here, but I do this with them almost every night. And it goes like this: stay strong. And when I say hand motions, I mean, they don't even have to say these words. They could, but they could just do the hand motions. Stay strong, protect your mind. And the reason I do this is I say, pretend your mind is like a castle surrounded by the ocean, like Mont Saint Michel in France, and there's waves coming and you have to have strong walls. So I'll say, stay strong, protect your mind, meaning build big walls. And then I say, we're going to pull our loved ones out of the Bible prison, like you're pulling a rope, pull them out of the Bible prison. And when they get out, we're going to have the biggest party ever. While we're waiting, remember, it's not real. You can always say no to the Bible bullets, like Neo in the Matrix.
Right.
And the more they teach us the Bible, the less we believe, because there's no gods, 0, no gods, and that's good. And we can go through those hand motions with them, and they can do it blindfolded. But it's a way of teaching kids, even at a young age, you can push back. You are powerful. You don't have, and I say to my kids a lot, like if I take them out to Starbucks with me or something, we'll go through and I'll say, who has the power over what you believe? And the answer, of course, they know is I do, meaning them, not me, but them. And just to empower kids and to say, you don't have to believe what you're told. You can choose, take your own path. You're empowered. No one gets to dominate your worldview. No one does. Even atheists, no one gets to dominate it. You get to pick what you believe, and to just give them that power. And I love it when I do that with them, especially. They love doing the hand thing where I push, no, and to give kids the ability to say no. I know it sounds like it's a silly thing, but one of the biggest factors in all this is the bravery to, like, when you're a Christian and you grow up in it, you feel like you cannot say no to the Bible or to God or to the theology you're taught. And the bravery to stand up, it feels like, like that proverbial lump in your throat, like, should I be doing this? Like, it'd be like a 5-year-old standing up to some, 7 foot tall, huge bodybuilder. Like, you just don't feel like you can take this on. It's far from the Bible. It's like a David and Goliath situation. And to be able to empower kids and say, from the earliest days, you can take the power. You can have the power. And to let them know, like you mentioned science, let them know people do believe differently. I love how my kids, they've come to love Neil deGrasse Tyson. And I love that.
I love
so
him.
Excited.
He's so great. I love watching his videos.
they sometimes beg me, can we please watch Cosmos? And
that's so cool.
It's so awesome. And when you give kids that power, and then you say, you know what? I believe you are smart enough as you grow and get more and more information to make the best decision. You empower them. You are giving them a shot at reality. Something could still mess them up. All we can do is try. But I love that fact. And I hope people that are deconverting, who have kids or soon will, are thinking through that this is bigger than just our journey. Our families, to borrow the phrase we used to use with Christianity, we need to break the generational curses. And in this case, the biggest one is Christianity. We need to break it and get this stuff out of our culture. But anyway, I know I've asked you a lot, but was there any part of your story that we didn't get to there at the end that you wanted to add before we wrap up?
I did have a thought and now I can't remember. I was just going to say, my daughter, because you're talking about, what you say to your kids. My dad always used to do the prayer, "Now I lay me down to sleep," with me growing up every night. And I was doing that with my daughter until I stopped last year. And sometimes I'm afraid that, she's 4, so I don't think she's going to remember what those words were. But I think back and and I go through the prayer in my head, and I'm like, that is so toxic and scary. If I die before I wake, like I pray the Lord my soul to take. Like, it's just why are you do that every night before bed? So even when my dad, when I was older and I no longer had my dad praying with me at night, I was still doing that myself. Basically, praying the prayer, the salvation prayer every night, just in case I died.
Yeah. Cover the bases.
Yeah. And I just feel like doing that to children, it's so abusive.
Yeah.
And I feel like even if you didn't grow up in the church, if you grew up in America, you have been influenced by evangelical Christianity somewhat. And I think it is a generational curse, and it needs to end. And I'm really hoping that all this information getting out there and people sharing their stories will make a difference.
Yeah. Have you seen recently that one musician who's talking about a war on deconstruction?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. If you're on TikTok, yes, everyone's talking about it. I'm just like, so funny.
It's crazy, but like they actually think that what they need to spend their time doing is fighting with, tooth and nail philosophically with those of us who would say that an ancient Canaanite demigod who, likes circumcision, who likes blood magic, who endorsed slavery, who endorsed land theft and stoning, genital mutilation, all this, and child brides, that the fact that we are uncomfortable with that and starting to say, no, thank you, that somehow that they're going to win this proverbial war just because they think that traditional Christianity is where it's at. It's like, you can't talk your way out of this. You can't do enough of your whatever concerts. Like, we're leaving and we're going to win this, because what's happening, I hope, is that rationality is winning. We were conscious primates for a long time, but now we're becoming much more attuned to rationality, to science, and to the future that's potentially there. And we're saying religion is keeping this culture, this world, from achieving its best, possibility for the future. And we're not going to let ancient mythology dominate our future if we have anything to say about it. And
that's what I love now, is just having the freedom to realize, like, the world's not ending. Like, I used to think the world was just getting worse and worse and worse, and life sucks, and you just need to save as many people as you can. But now it's like, no, things are getting better, and I can play a part in that, in the world being a better place, and we can make a better place for our kids, and our kids can make the world a better place, and, more loving and kind, and, just in every way.
Yeah.
And I feel like Christianity prevents that. It prevents progress and us moving forward. And, I was talking to a Christian yesterday about this. She's just not a good person, but, she was basically, I was talking about the abuse that I experienced, the spiritual abuse and stuff that, just growing up, and all her comments were just about how worldly I am, and how I'm just, spewing progressive Christian rhetoric. And I'm just like, I didn't like say it out there. I didn't even say like, I'm not a Christian. I was just like, this has nothing to do with progressive Christianity. I'm telling you how I feel. I'm telling you my experience. And so you're saying, because I'm telling you that what is happening in the church is wrong, that makes me worldly? Like, do you not understand, like, what you're saying? And I'm not going to go into details of that whole conversation, but she's blaming the people who are abused by the church for our issues, for basically doing it wrong, or
defend the abuser, not the abused.
Christians. And it's like, you're looking at this so backwards. Like, where is your compassion? Where is this Christ love? Like, it makes no sense. And it's like, then they start to get defensive, and it's like, I'm literally just sharing my story with you. Sometimes you just need to listen. Just listen. You don't have to have all the answers. I'm not even asking, I was just sharing my experience. And this was all in response to her talking about how it was the end days because of the war and this and that. And, I was basically trying to say, like, it's not, like, things are actually better than they were 100 years ago. I'm not like, we have a long way to go. We don't have world peace. But if you look at historically and, at humanity, we are doing a lot better than we were, and we can only get better. And that apparently was worldly.
Crazy.
So
it really shows that there's no power in the gospel. They talk all the gospel so powerful, can change lives. People
like, oh, well, it's the truth. I know the truth. And it's like, what are you saying?
Yeah.
Do you, like, I'm trying to have a critical, like, thought conversation with you about how the world is going, and you're just making it about, oh, the truth of the gospel. Like, do you hear yourself? But then at the same time, I'm like, I know I used to think similarly. I wasn't as extreme as this woman, but I'm like, I can't believe I used to think that way.
Yeah. And the reality too is they have no idea when they say the gospel. I know the gospel is like the idea of Jesus saving us, but the gospels, the books, like, I've been digging in a lot more with Dennis MacDonald's work on how there's so many of these stories are copied right out of the Iliad and the Odyssey and Euripides Bacchae. And it's like the gospel stories that you're reading that you think are so critical, you don't even know where they came from. Like this.
I know. That's the thing, is that they don't know where it came from. Yeah. And it's like, I realize I know more about the Bible now, like I've learned in the last year or two, than I learned all the years I was in church. Yeah. For 27 years.
Yeah. Why would they keep that information from us? It's like, it makes no sense.
Right.
Like, what are you afraid of? Why are you so afraid of the truth? It's mind-boggling.
And I remember I did actually mention to an old Christian friend, I started talking about how, Asherah and El, and how, they had Yahweh, and then Yahweh became El, basically. And then, oh, well, that's not true. That's not true. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, why don't you do some research? You can do a quick Google search.
It's not that hard to find
right there.
Yeah. Really good scholars too, not like some one-off YouTuber, like scholarship.
Exactly. It blows my mind. It really blows my mind. And I have to be careful, because I do get so angry at these people, and I'm like, I can't let myself, get so angry at them, because I know they're brainwashed, because I was brainwashed. My issue, I need to have issue with the people who are harming, who are creating the harm.
Yeah. But you realize too that it's not just that they don't know this stuff. It's, for a lot of them, they won't know it.
Right.
I've got loved ones very close to me who they don't care. Like, if you tell them the Asherah thing, you tell them about the copies from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey,
they don't care.
Pythagoras, they truly don't care. They will not care to watch a video or read a book. It's like irrelevant. You're wrong. It's irrelevant. I know that I know that I know the Bible is true and it's inerrant.
I have a family member who was saying, oh, I support everything you're going through, and let me know if there's, anything I can do to help. And I was like, well, you could read these books or listen to this podcast, or, watch this video, just educate yourself. And haven't done either of those things. Yeah. So it's very, very frustrating. It's very frustrating. And just how deep these roots go. It's so ingrained in us, and just in humanity. If you look at the history of religion in general, and we used religion to help us understand the world that we could not understand, basically the sun and the stars and the moon, like those were the deities, and the wind and so they needed some way to explain it. Now we know what the sun and the moon are. We know what wind and oxygen, like we know what these things are. So that's just one example. There's so many things, to me, religion is outdated, in my opinion. Like, we're beyond it. Yeah.
And just adding on to that, the grief that you go through to realize these people are literally going to spend their lives, unless they deconvert, they're going to spend their lives absolutely embraced by a delusion.
Yes.
embraced by and embracing a delusion. And it's heartbreaking. And you want the freedom for them. And
It's
at the same
hard when
point,
you see loved ones suffering too.
Yeah.
That's, I think, was one of the hardest things, is when I see them suffering,
Yeah.
and knowing that they can find that freedom if they would just let go.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially to stop hurting kids. Well, I know we've gone long here, but I just want to say I appreciate your time sharing your story. I would love to connect again down the line.
Yeah.
It sounds like you've got a lot of things going on in terms of things you're thinking through, and
Yeah.
just some
It's like new
ways that
things every day.
yeah, ways
Like,
that you're going to be impacting the community. I definitely want to connect again and kind of dig deep into some of these things. So we've been speaking with Layne Yancey. Layne, thank you so much for your time. This has been awesome, and I really do appreciate it. I do want to connect again, and thank you for what you're doing on TikTok. Keep going. We need your voice in this.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it again.
Yes.
Thanks, Layne.
Bye.